If you're watching a review of Middle-earth Shadow of Mordor in 2019, either you found this in a sale on Steam or on Green Man Gaming or somewhere, and you're wondering if it's worth it, or you've bought the sequel first, played that, enjoyed it, and wondering whether to get this one, and do you need to? Well, I will say that it is worth it, especially if you found it on sale. But, and it's a big but, the sequel, Middle-earth Shadow of War, does everything better in all regards. Seriously, if you're only going to get one, get that one instead. It's become one of my favourite games I think I've ever played. It was a whole load of fun, and it does everything a little bit better than Middle-earth Shadow of Mordor. That being said, this is a good game, so let's tell you all about it. But first, links down below the video so you can check out my Shadow of War Let's Play if you're interested. Right, the story of this game takes a little bit of getting your head around. It's set in Middle-earth, after Sauron created the Rings of Power and corrupted the Nine Men, but before the Lord of the Rings series. Gollum is present in this, if that gives you an idea of the timeline, and he has lost the ring. You play Talion, a ranger of Gondor, and you're dead. Yeah, I know, strange way to start a game for a hero, right? But it gets weirder than that. You're not just dead, you've been banished from the afterlife, cursed, and you've been bound to the soul of Celebrimbor, an ancient elf lord who's now a wraith. And not just a wraith, but a wraith who's lost his memory. He does remember, however, that he wants to help thwart Sauron's plans to come to power in Mordor. You're going to fight Sauron's captains, you're going to kill a few orc warbands, you're going to help Celebrimbor get his memory back, and later on you're actually going to take control of some of the orc warbands, and they're going to fight on your side. Yeah, I know it sounds really complicated and strange for a Middle-earth game, and it is, but the game actually does a decent job of explaining the story as you go through. But honestly, story-wise, I could take it or leave it. It's the gameplay that makes this game stand out. It's probably best described as Assassin's Creed Middle-earth. It's got this wonderful mix of stealth and really frantic combat cinematic sword-fighting action. All of it set in a very beautiful and fairly open world in Mordor. The story is broken up into 20 missions and you can take those on whenever you feel ready. And there's also lots of orc captains doing their own thing and fighting for you to go and get involved in. So it's not too linear, the game. There is linear progression through it, but you can kind of choose when you want to go and do that. Stealthing through the orc camps and climbing up towers is pretty good fun, and stealth kills are awesome, but it's the frantic button-mashing combat that I really liked. It looks really cinematic, it looks hard to pull off, but it isn't, it's dead easy. The game prompts you when you need to block and dodge and all the rest of it, and it's just a question of timing your hits back. It looks great, it's great fun, it's the best part of the game, in my opinion, and the sequel, I mentioned earlier, it does everything better. Yeah, the sequel does this even better too. You also get to play in Wraith form, which is useful for spotting hidden bits and magical ancient stuff, and also for shooting the spectral bow. I don't know how that works, but it's also good fun if you like playing as a bit of a sniper. You do have limited arrows, which are upgraded later on, so you're not going to play as a pure range class, don't think about that. This is a hack 'em up. Oh, and also, just to add another weird mix into the story, you're immortal. You can't be killed. You certainly do have limited life, and when you take too much damage in combat, you kind of die, I guess, but you're brought back to life instantly by Celebrimbor, who gives you a little bit of trash talk for getting yourself killed at the nearest save point. There are lots of little mini boss fights you can take on throughout the game, where you're fighting the leader of an orc warband, and one of the cool things about this is that all the orc leaders have their own strengths and weaknesses. Some are immune to fire, some are vulnerable to fire, some are immune to range, some are vulnerable to range, etc, etc, etc. Some are terrified by beasts, which you can ride in this game. You can tame Caragors and ride around on them. You don't need to find the weaknesses on all the orc leaders, but if you want to, then you can pick up the intel from certain weaker orcs wandering about by dominating them, which is one of your wraith powers, by the way. You can dominate them, read their minds, or you can convert some of the orcs to fight on your side. And later on in the game, you can also dominate orc captains, send them off on missions against other orc captains to fight duels, to ambush them, to take their positions, to become war chiefs, etc, etc. That's actually quite cool and adds more interest and variety into the game. There's also a series of challenges, stealth ones for the dagger, ranged ones for the bow, and just good old combat challenges as well. You don't need to complete these, they're like little mini games or submissions. Basically, they do unlock other points that you can spend on upgrading your weapons. They're not necessary, and some of the stealth ones in particular I found to be an utter pain in the arse because they do have to be completed without being detected at all. And sometimes that just feels like it's a little bit out of your control, and when you fail, it's all the way back to the start. But it doesn't just warp you back to the start of the mission. Sometimes the mission takes place half the map away from where you actually have to start it. So as well as failing the mission, you then have to run all the way back to where you started it, commence it again. It can be really frustrating, and some of these one in particular actually, I just found to be so much of a pain in the arse. No matter how carefully I did it, I couldn't do it, that I just sodded it off and left it and ignored it. And you know what? I didn't actually need it to finish and enjoy the game, but you might enjoy it more than me, but I found that to be a bit of a sticking point. There's also a ton of little collectible things scattered around the map, little remnants of the Gondorian Empire and bygone ages, and little memories and stuff for Celebrimbor. It does feel a little bit of a grindy thing. You don't have to do these by any means. They do bring benefits if you want to go and pick them up. Some of the things are so far out of the way from where you'd normally travel, it feels like they're just put in there just to make the game a little bit longer. It doesn't really feel that great to me. Kind of one of the weaker aspects of the game. Not a problem, just meh. Now, as you play and fight and complete missions, you'll get experience points, and you'll also get character progression points, which you can spend in leveling up your skills. The skill upgrades are very, very good. Some unlock completely new abilities, like the ability to ride Caragors, to dominate captains, to stealth draining combat, and all sorts of other things. They're very good. The only trouble is they do feel a little bit linear, as you will have to you'll find yourself unlocking all the skills on a particular tier before you get to move to the next tier down. So it's not like you can just go straight down the combat tree or straight down the stealth or the range trees. You'll find that you'll progress in a fairly linear manner, although when you first unlock a new tier, you can of course choose which upgrades you want to pick out of it first. And down at the bottom of each of the skill lines is a pretty epic ability that you can unlock, which was also a disappointment because by the time I'd finished the game, I'd unlocked 2 of these, and I didn't get to use them in the final boss fights, which is something I'll come on to later on. Graphics and sound are both excellent. I know this game's been out a few years. I still think it looks beautiful playing here on Ultra. I really like it. No complaints there. A little bit of slight glitchiness on some of the shadows on some of the Orc captains' faces. Maybe that's just limited to my system, but I didn't even realise it was a glitch until I was 3/4 of the way through the game. I just thought it was some black blood or gunge on the faces. But other than that, yeah, it looks good, it sounds good. Right, on to the bad points of the game, problems I found. The final boss fights were disappointing, I have to say. The story missions, the last few when you're facing Sauron's main captains, it just didn't work as I imagined it would. All that frantic, awesome button-mashing combat that we've seen throughout the game wasn't required in the final fights. It was a case of just moving around, timing your positions, and pressing a key on the controller, or on the keyboard, or on the mouse, depending on what you're using, at the right time. It meant that all those fancy upgrades and things I'd unlocked for the weapons and the skills, they weren't used. They weren't needed, which was a really big anticlimax. I was hoping to use some of these ultimate abilities fighting what should have been the biggest, hardest bosses of the game, and I didn't need to. In fact, you couldn't. You didn't get that option because those upgrades, those skills weren't actually what you needed to beat the bosses. It was a disappointment. I don't want to give away too much of the story here, but it was a bit of a downside. You do get to use those skills, and the game doesn't just end when you finish the story missions. You can carry on fighting and trying to build up your army of orcs and defeat the enemy orcs that are still in the game, which carry on respawning, of course. But yes, the end game for me was disappointing. So I never really got to experience those wonderful ultimate abilities. In fact, there was a couple that I didn't unlock and weren't even necessary to. Also, there's the grindy collectible quests. They're nice at first. You get a little bit of cash for doing some of them. But towards the end, it just feels like there's so many that I just couldn't be bothered picking them all up. And I didn't need to. It's there if you want to, but there's no big penalty for not doing it either. I did find the game a little easy, I must admit, but I was playing with the combat prompts on just because it makes the fight scenes look cool and they're my favourite part. It might be because I played all the way through the sequel before coming to this, so I kind of knew what to expect and what to do. The hardest bits were some of the stealth missions where you really have to pay attention, look all around you. That's quite good, there's still some challenge there. The game overall isn't just like a walk in the park. There are parts where you really have to think about what you're doing, but it was just a little bit easy. I wanted the fights against the Orc captains and the end bosses to be tougher, and they really weren't. And now, the ending of the story. This was the final problem. Well, it's not so much a problem, but the ending feels a little bit flat, but only because it's setting it up for the sequel. See, the story continues and really finishes at the end of Middle-earth Shadow of War, the sequel to this game. So the story throughout the entire game, I never felt was really important to enjoying the game at all. But right at the end, perhaps the weakest part of it came right there, the bit that should be the strongest. The good stuff is nearly everything else. The combat is really, really good. By the time you've played all the way through, and it took me about 20 hours, it maybe was getting a little bit samey. The sequel does this better, which I've probably mentioned too many times already. The cutscenes in the game were good, the cinematics were good, the voice acting was good, sound and graphics I thought were really beautiful, especially considering when this game was made, and it still holds up now. I am glad that I played through this, I did enjoy it, but I will say everything that I like about this is done just that little bit better in the sequel. So if you're only going to buy one game, go and get that. I'll have a video coming out on that very soon. So yeah, Middle-earth Shadow of Mordor is worth it, especially if you pick it up on sale. For just a few quid, this game is considerably better than a lot of the 50 quid unfinished bullshit AAA games that are being released at the moment. A good old cheap game is better than an unfinished new rubbish game that costs you a load of money. That's what I reckon anyway. So don't forget to come and follow me on Twitch, link down below, where you can see me playing these sort of games live 3 times a week. You can join in the discussion and become one of the community. But if you're only going to buy one game of the Middle-earth series, get Middle-earth Shadow of War. It's just slightly better than this.